The year is 2020. You're walking through a metropolis designed for 1 million people. The architecture is stunning. Replicas of Paris towering glass obelisks, manicured parks that rival Central Park. But there is one thing missing. You. Well, you and literally everyone else. The streets are silent. The traffic lights cycle from red to green for cars that don't exist. The only sound is the wind howling through the empty elevator shafts of a 40-story luxury apartment complex that has never known a single resident. This isn't a scene from The Last of Us or some post-apocalyptic fallout. This is modern-day China. We are looking at a mathematical impossibility that became reality. 65 million empty homes. To put that in perspective, that's enough empty housing to shelter the entire population of France. It is the single largest asset class in human history, valued at roughly $60 trillion at its peak, and it is currently imploding in slow motion. Today we aren't just looking at charts. We're going to look at the human cost, the corruption, and the sheer absurdity of the greatest Ponzi scheme ever disguised as urbanization. Buckle up, it's going to get messy. 1. The concrete addiction, how we got here. Let's start with a statistic that sounds fake, but I promise you, it is terrifyingly real. Between 2011 and 2013, China used more cement than the United States used in the entire 20th century. Read that again. In 3 years, China poured more concrete than America did to build the Hoover Dam, the interstate highway system, the Empire State Building, and every suburb from Levittown to Los Angeles, combined. How does that happen? Was there a sudden, desperate need to house 1 billion homeless people? No, it was an addiction. But instead of heroin, the drug of choice was GDP growth. To understand this, we have to go back to 1994. Imagine you're a local mayor in a Chinese province. The central government in Beijing just overhauled the tax system. They decided to keep the lion's share of tax revenue for themselves, but told you, the local mayor, hey, you're still responsible for building roads, schools and hospitals. Good luck paying for it. You're broke. You have no tax base. So what do? You look at the one thing you actually own. The land. In China, the government owns all the land, so you start seizing farmland from peasants, paying them pennies on the dollar, and selling it to property developers for millions. This is called land transfer fees. Suddenly you're rich. You can build that subway system. You can build a new stadium. But here is where the dark humor kicks in. To keep the money flowing, you need the land prices to keep going up. If land prices drop, your city goes bankrupt. So you, the government, start incentivizing developers to build everywhere. It didn't matter if people needed the homes. It mattered that the building of the homes created economic activity. Scenario time. Imagine you decide to dig a hole in your backyard and fill it back up. In terms of productivity, you have achieved absolutely nothing. But in terms of GDP, you paid for the shovel, you paid the guy to dig, you paid for the dirt. The GDP goes up. China began building for the sake of building. They built cities like Ordos in Inner Mongolia. In the early 2000s, it was hailed as the Dubai of northern China. Developers flocked there, pouring billions into luxury villas and museums. Fast forward to 2010, a reporter from Time magazine visits. What do they find? It's a ghost town. The only people there are the street sweepers cleaning up dust for imaginary residents. Why? Because the homes were built for investment, not for living. This system created a perverse incentive structure known as local government financing vehicles, LGFVs. These are shadowy corporate entities set up by local governments to borrow money from banks to build infrastructure. They are currently sitting on an estimated $9 trillion in hidden debt. That is roughly the GDP of Germany and Japan combined, just hiding in the shadows of local Chinese bureaucracy. And the scary part? Nobody knows the real number. It's a shell game. Local governments sell land to LGFVs, which they own, to artificially pump up the price of land, to borrow more money from banks, which the state owns, to build more apartments that nobody lives in. It is a snake eating its own tail, but the snake is made of concrete, and the tail is the life savings of the Chinese middle class. 2. The pre-sale Ponzi scheme, the Great Betrayal. Now let's get personal. Let's talk about the victims. Because when a bubble bursts, the rich usually find a parachute. The poor? They hit the pavement. In the West, if you buy a new construction home, you usually put down a deposit, maybe 5% or 10%. and you pay the mortgage once the house is built and you get the keys. That makes sense, right? You don't pay for the pizza until the pizza is in your hand. China does it differently. In China, the standard practice is the pre-sale model. Imagine this. You are Mr. Li. You are a factory manager in Henan province. You have worked 60-hour weeks for 20 years. You want your son to get married, but in China, no woman will marry a man without a property deed. It's a cultural prerequisite. No house, no spouse. So you take your life savings, plus the life savings of your parents, and maybe your in-laws. You walk into a sales office for Evergrande, the biggest, most prestigious developer in the country. They show you a beautiful model made of plastic, a gleaming tower with a gym and a park. It will be finished in 2023, they promise. They ask for the full payment up front, or you take out a mortgage immediately. You start paying the bank today for a home that is currently just a hole in the ground. Mr. Li does it. Millions of Mr. Lis did it. Roughly 90% of all homes sold in China were sold before they were completed. Here's the trick, and this is where it turns into a Ponzi scheme. The developer, Evergrande, takes Mr. Li's money. Do they use that money to build Mr. Li's tower? No. They use that money to buy new land from the local government. Remember, the government needs the cash. They use the new land as collateral to get new loans to market new projects to new buyers. They were using the money from the new investors to pay the debts of the old projects. In financial terms, we call this robbing Peter to pay Paul. In legal terms, we usually call this fraud. For 2 decades, this worked beautifully because property prices only went up. It was the perpetual motion machine of finance. Mr. Li didn't care if the apartment wasn't built yet because on paper, his unbuilt apartment had already appreciated by 20%. He felt rich. But then, August 2020 happened. The central government in Beijing, led by President Xi Jinping, realized this debt bomb was going to blow up the entire country. They introduced the 3 red lines policy. It was a strict set of financial rules that forced developers to stop borrowing if their debt ratios were too high. Suddenly the music stopped. Evergrande, which had $300 billion in liabilities, couldn't borrow any more money, and because they couldn't borrow, they couldn't pay the contractors, and because they couldn't pay the contractors, the cranes stopped moving. Before I tell you what happened to Mr. Li, do me a favor. If you've ever regretted a purchase, maybe a gadget or a car, hit the like button. Now imagine that regret is your entire family's net worth, and the product you bought doesn't exist. That's the level of pain we're talking about. Back to the story. In 2022, a phenomenon started spreading across China that terrified the Communist Party more than any foreign army: the mortgage boycott. Thousands of home buyers, organized on social media apps like WeChat and Douyin, collectively decided, if you don't build the house, we won't pay the mortgage. This was revolutionary. In a surveillance state where dissent is crushed, regular people were so desperate they didn't care. They posted videos of themselves living in their unfinished apartments. We're talking concrete shells with no windows, no electricity, no water. They were cooking on camp stoves in the middle of high-rise skeletons, holding up signs that read, "Give us our homes." One video went viral of a young couple moving into their unfinished apartment in Zhengzhou. They had to climb 20 flights of stairs because there were no elevators. They slept under a mosquito net in a room with no glass in the windows. It was heartbreaking. It was a visual representation of the death of the Chinese dream. The developers had taken the money and, well, where did it go? It went to soccer teams. It went to electric vehicle startups that never produced a car. It went to paying off the interest on previous loans. And of course, a decent chunk of it went to the personal fortunes of the tycoons running these companies. Xu Jiayin, the founder of Evergrande, was once the richest man in Asia. He owned a yacht, private jets, and even a calligraphy collection worth millions. While Mr. Li was sleeping in a concrete shell, Xu was trying to sell his mansion in London to pay off creditors. The pre-sale model wasn't just a business practice, it was a breach of trust on a societal level. It broke the unspoken contract between the people and the economy. And the fallout. We are only in the first inning. 3. The demographic cliff, the empty cradle. If the financial fraud wasn't enough to make you sweat, let's talk about the biological clock. Because real estate at its core is a game of musical chairs. You buy a chair hoping that when the music stops, someone else will want to sit in it and pay you more than you paid. But in China, the music is slowing down and the players are leaving the room. We have to talk about the one-child policy. Introduced in 1980, it was a social experiment designed to curb population growth. And boy, did it work! It worked too well. For decades, China prevented an estimated 400 million births. Now, fast forward to 2024, those missing 400 million people? Those are the people who would have been buying their first apartments right now. They don't exist. China's population dropped in 2022 and 2023. This is the first time this has happened since the Great Famine in the 1960s. The United Nations predicts China's population could effectively halve by the end of the century. Imagine you are a real estate investor. You are banking on endless demand, but you're trying to sell baby strollers in a retirement home. The math just doesn't work. There is a concept in China called the 4-2-1 structure. 4 grandparents, 2 parents, 1 child. For a long time, this fueled the bubble. The 6 wallets, 4 grandparents, plus 2 parents, would pool all their money to buy 1 apartment for the little emperor, the only child. It concentrated incredible wealth into single properties. But now, flip the script. That 1 child grows up. The grandparents pass away. The parents pass away. Suddenly, that 1 child inherits the apartment from the parents, and maybe an apartment from each set of grandparents. 1 person, 3 apartments. Who is he going to sell them to? His peers? They already inherited 3 apartments too. This is the nightmare scenario for the housing market. Oversupply meets depopulation, and it gets darker. The youth unemployment rate in China hit a record high in 2023, officially over 20% before the government simply stopped publishing the data, which is the bureaucratic equivalent of covering your eyes and yelling, "I can't see you." Young people in China are embracing a movement called tangping, or lying flat. They are opting out of the rat race. They aren't getting married, they aren't having kids, and they certainly aren't taking on 30-year mortgages for overpriced shoeboxes. In 2013, China recorded 13.5 million marriages. In 2022, just 6.8 million. That is a 50% crash in household formation. Without marriages, you don't have new households. Without new households, you don't need new apartments. The demographic tidal wave is crashing against the concrete seawall of the property market, and the concrete is starting to crack. Speaking of cracking concrete, hey, quick pause. We are wading through some heavy economic doom and gloom here. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the collapse of global superpowers, or if you just like watching things blow up, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. I'm planning a video on the Japanese lost decades next, and trust me, you don't want to miss the sequel to this disaster movie. Also, comment below. If you could buy a house anywhere in the world for $1, where would it be? Let's see who has the best taste. Alright, back to the crumbling buildings. 4. Tofu Dreg Projects, the crumbling reality. You might be thinking, okay, so the market is oversupplied, but at least the buildings are assets, right? They'll last for 50-100 years. Wrong. Allow me to introduce you to one of the most terrifying phrases in the Chinese lexicon, dufuzha. Translation, tofu dreg projects. The term was coined in 1998 by former Premier Zhu Rongji after he visited flood dikes on the Yangtze River that melted away like wet tissue paper. He said they were as flimsy as the dregs left over from making tofu. In the rush to build fast and cheap, quality control didn't just take a back seat, it was kicked out of the moving car. We have seen footage that defies physics. Concrete pillars that crumble when you poke them with a stick. Apartment walls filled with styrofoam instead of insulation. Balconies falling off the sides of high-rises because the rebar was thinner than a chopstick. There is a viral video from a homeowner in Changsha who realized she could scrape the concrete off her ceiling with her bare hands, revealing the rusty metal underneath. She wasn't renovating. She was just touching her ceiling. Why does this happen? Corruption. The contractor bribes the inspector. The inspector looks the other way when the contractor uses sea sand instead of river sand for the concrete. Side note, sea sand has salt. Salt corrodes steel. Using sea sand in reinforced concrete is basically putting a time bomb inside the walls, but it's cheaper. And since the average lifespan of a Chinese building is often estimated at just 25 to 30 years, compared to 70 plus in the West, the developers don't care. They will be long gone by the time the building falls down. This creates a terrifying economic reality. These homes are not assets, they are liabilities. A house in London or New York built in 1920 is often more valuable today because it has good bones. A high-rise built in a Tier 3 Chinese city in 2018 might be uninhabitable by 2040. So, not only did people like Mr. Lee lose their life savings on a home that might never be finished, but even if it is finished, it might literally fall apart before he pays off the mortgage. And this isn't just about bad builders, it's about the sheer scale of waste. There are entire fields in China filled with electric vehicles, EVs, that are brand new, rotting in the sun. Why? To game the subsidy system. There are mountains of shared bicycles that were produced to pump up numbers and then discarded. The housing market is just the largest version of this fake growth. We built it to say we built it, not because we needed it to last. And when you have 65 million empty units, and a chunk of them are made of tofu, you don't have a housing market. You have a landfill with a view. 5. The global contagion, why you should care. Okay, I hear you saying, this sounds terrible for Mr. Lee and the people in Henan province, but I live in Ohio, or Manchester or Toronto. Why should I care if a concrete tower falls over in China? This is the part where the horror movie monster leaves the house and heads for the city. We live in a hyper-connected global economy. When the second largest economy in the world sneezes, the rest of us catch pneumonia. But in this case, China isn't sneezing, it's having a seizure. Let's break down the 3 vectors of contagion that are already hitting your wallet, whether you realize it or not. Vector A, the commodity crash. For the last 20 years, China was the black hole for the world's raw materials. They bought 50% of the world's steel, 60% of the world's concrete, and massive amounts of copper, lumber, and iron ore. Countries like Australia, Brazil, and Canada built their entire economies around digging stuff up and shipping it to China to build ghost cities. When China stops building, the demand for those materials falls off a cliff. Brazil loses its biggest soy and iron buyer. Australia sees its mining revenue tank. Africa sees infrastructure loans dry up because China can no longer afford the Belt and Road Initiative. This triggers a global recession in emerging markets, which eventually ripples back to the US stock market. Vector B, the real estate retreat. Remember how housing prices in Vancouver, Sydney, London, and California skyrocketed over the last decade? A significant chunk of that was fueled by wealthy Chinese citizens trying to get their money out of China. They didn't trust their own property market, smart move in hindsight, so they bought yours. But now, the liquidity crunch is forcing them to sell. We're already seeing fire sales in luxury markets from London to San Francisco. Chinese developers are abandoning projects in Los Angeles and halting skyscrapers in London. When the dumb money leaves the market, the bubble deflates. If you own a home, the value of your asset is indirectly tied to the solvency of a guy in Shanghai. Vector C, deflation export. This is the weirdest one. Because domestic consumption in China is dead, nobody's buying anything because they feel poor, Chinese factories are desperate to sell their goods. So they are flooding the world with cheap EVs, cheap solar panels, and cheap electronics. On the surface, this sounds great. Cheap stuff. But it destroys manufacturing industries in Europe, the US, and Mexico. It leads to trade wars, tariffs, and geopolitical tension. We're already seeing the EU and US slapping 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs. This is economic warfare, sparked by the housing collapse. So, no, you aren't safe in Ohio. The butterfly flaps its wings in Beijing, and a factory closes in the Midwest. 6. The government's dilemma, the controlled demolition. Now put yourself in the shoes of Xi Jinping. You are sitting in the Zhongnanhai, the leadership compound in Beijing. You have a choice to make, and both options are catastrophic. Option 1. The Lehman Brothers approach. You let the free market do its thing. You let Evergrande, Country Garden, and Vanka go bankrupt. Result, the $60 trillion bubble bursts instantly. Millions of people lose their savings overnight. Banks collapse. Social unrest explodes. You might face a revolution. Verdict, unacceptable. Option 2, the money printer approach. You print trillions of yuan and bail everyone out. You pay off the bad debts. Result, you hyperinflate your currency. The yuan becomes worthless. You signal to every corrupt developer that they can keep gambling because daddy government will always save them. Moral hazard. You turn China into a zombie economy like Japan in the 1990s, but with a much poorer population. Verdict, also unacceptable, but slightly less violent. So the CCP is trying to walk a tightrope between these two cliffs. They are attempting a controlled demolition. They have issued a whitelist mechanism. Basically, Beijing told the banks, don't lend money to the developers, the companies are dead anyway. lend money to the specific projects that are almost finished. The goal is to finish the homes to stop the riots, but let the billionaires behind the companies go broke. But there is a problem. The hole is too deep. In January 2024, a Hong Kong court ordered the liquidation of Evergrande. It was the financial equivalent of an execution order, but inside mainland China, the liquidation is largely ignored. The local governments are trying to protect their own assets while the central government tries to clean up the mess. It is a game of whack-a-mole. Country Garden, once considered the safe developer, defaulted in late 2023. Sino-Ocean defaulted. Sunak defaulted. The government is currently trying to pivot the economy from property construction to high-end manufacturing, AI, chips, EVs. They call it new productive forces. They are hoping that if they build enough robots and microchips, it will offset the loss of the real estate sector. But here is the math problem. Real estate was 30% of China's GDP. High-tech manufacturing is maybe 10 to 15%. You cannot plug a hole the size of the Grand Canyon with a handful of silicon chips. Scenario: imagine you quit your job as a CEO, real estate, to start an Etsy store selling hand-painted rocks, manufacturing. You might sell some rocks, but you aren't going to pay the mortgage on the mansion you bought when you were CEO. China is currently realizing that the transition away from a concrete economy is going to be painful, slow, and potentially destabilizing. And the scariest part for the government? The people have stopped believing the narrative. When confidence dies in a fiat currency system or a speculative market, it doesn't come back. You can print money, but you cannot print trust. 7. The mirror, the warning for us. Before we wrap this up, we need to address the elephant in the room. It's easy to look at China, point a finger and say, look at those central planners messing everything up. That's what happens with state capitalism. But that is the wrong takeaway. The warning in the title of this video isn't just about China. It's about human psychology. It's about the universal belief that real estate only goes up. Does that sound familiar? If you live in Canada, Australia, the UK, or parts of the US, you are living in your own version of this reality. Maybe we don't have 65 million empty homes, but we have the same financialization of housing. We stopped viewing houses as places to sleep, eat, and raise a family, and started viewing them as high-yield savings accounts made of brick. China is just the most extreme example of what happens when you let that mentality run unchecked for 20 years. They took the logic of buy now, get rich later, and scaled it up to a population of 1.4 billion people. The ghost cities of China are a physical monument to malinvestment. Definition time. Malinvestment is what happens when cheap money, low interest rates, tricks people into putting capital where it doesn't belong. In 2008, the US built too many houses in the Nevada desert for people who couldn't afford them. In 2024, China built too many high-rises in the middle of nowhere for people who don't exist. The lesson is brutal but simple. You cannot financialize your way to prosperity. You cannot print concrete. Eventually, the laws of supply and demand assert themselves. Gravity always wins. If there is a warning here for the rest of the world, it is this. When an economy becomes too dependent on selling houses to itself to generate growth, it is not growing. It is dying. It is cannibalizing its own future to pay for its present. China is now facing decades of stagnation to work off this excess. They call it the garbage time of history, a period where nothing happens, and you just have to wait for the bad debt to rot away. Don't think it can't happen where you live. The laws of math do not need a visa to cross borders. Final thoughts. So where does that leave us? We are witnessing the end of the greatest construction boom in human history. A boom that consumed more concrete than civilization had ever seen, lifted millions out of poverty, and then trapped millions more in a nightmare of debt and unfinished dreams. The ghost cities aren't just empty buildings. They are museums of hubris. They are silent reminders that markets can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent, but they cannot remain irrational forever. For Mr. Lee, and millions like him, the dream is over. The money is gone. The concrete is cracking. For the rest of us, we should be taking notes, because when the dust settles, we might find that the foundation of our own global economy was resting on that same shaky ground. If you want to understand how another superpower dealt with a collapsing asset bubble, you need to watch my upcoming deep dive on Japan's lost decade. It's the prequel to this story, and it explains why your sushi is so expensive. Click here to subscribe so you don't miss it. And hey, drop a comment below. Do you think your country is in a housing bubble, or are we safe? I read every comment, mostly to argue with strangers, so let me know. Thanks for watching. Don't buy unfinished bridges. See you in the next one.